Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 11th of September 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Apologies for the slight delay there. Welcome to Patrick Henningsen joining us today in the studio. Welcome to the programme, Pat.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Well, we're going to get straight on, Patrick, with this. The Rule of Six. The Rule of Six was announced a couple of days ago by Boris Johnson and then reiterated in the House of Commons yesterday by Matt Hancock. And of course, what does this mean? We are, well, not allowed to gather in groups of more than six, unless your household is more than six. We covered this on Wednesday before the actual announcement was made. The fact that Coroni is somewhat confused about the fact that schools don't seem to be affected by the Rule of Six and workplaces don't seem to be affected by the Rule of Six, but households do seem to be affected by the Rule of Six, and certainly cafes and bars are.
We're being guided by the science. That's the important thing. We're being guided by the science.
Absolutely. Well, let's just have a look at what Boris had to say here. First of all, about restaurants.
Premises and venues where people meet socially will be legally required to request the contact details of a member of every party, record and retain these details for 21 days, and provide them to NHS Test and Trace without delay when required.
So, Patrick, legal requirement to request the details. So what happens if somebody refuses to give the details? This is a good question. I presume they get refused entry to whichever premises it is, or do the police get called, or maybe one of the new marshals will get called. We'll come on to that.
You could just wave your hand out the door and flag down one of the COVID marshals, the new COVID cops.
Well, let's see what Boris had to say about the new COVID cops. He's talking a little bit more about premises first.
We will support local authorities to make further and faster use of their powers to close venues that are breaking the rules and pose a risk to public health. Fines will be levied against hospitality venues that fail to ensure their premises remain COVID secure. We will boost the enforcement capacity of local authorities by introducing COVID-secure marshals to help ensure social distancing in town and city centres, and by setting up a register of environmental health officers that local authorities can draw upon for support.
So what do you make of that?
The thing that stuck out with me there is this term COVID secure. So it's not about COVID safe, because if you want to tell whether a venue is COVID safe, you would have to be some kind of scientific basis to it, or some sort of real medical truth or medical basis to it. But COVID secure, Mike, looks like kind of corporate policy. COVID secure. So what is that? You have to follow sort of a set of regulations or tick off boxes, and then you're secure. But you don't have to justify whether there's any real basis in terms of public health or any real health risk or anything like that. It's literally moved right into sort of corporativist, fascist kind of speak. COVID secure.
Absolutely. Now, the thing that struck me there, of course, is that what he was saying is that councils will have the power to shut down any venue which is not conforming or is not COVID secure. So individuals who perhaps don't want to cooperate when they're requested to give their personal information across, find themselves in the difficult position of possibly being the cause of that shutdown. So that's quite unpleasant as well.
Not only that, Mike, but the slippery slope here is these marshals and this new law. It will be used eventually to enforce mask wearing in some cases. I do see the COVID marshal as being mask police as well, not only social distancing.
Okay, but what's already been said about these marshals is that they won't have the power of arrest. They won't have the power to issue fines. They're going to have to go and get the police if they want to do that. The police not really sure exactly what they will be doing, but if you want to know what they will be doing, head over to cornwall.gov.uk. Here they are on screen, and if you look at the video here, COVID security measures for our high streets, because Cornwall was running the pilot for this, and it's the Cornwall pilot which is now being rolled out right across the country. So they've been, in some of their towns, have been running these marshals for since July, I believe. So this was the pilot. They've created safe queuing areas. Now in Plymouth today, Patrick, we're starting to see this, not bollards in the way that they have them there, but we're starting to see actually bollards set into the pavements to try to separate pedestrians and cyclists, apparently. And of course, it's going to help the new marshals know exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
So as the virus recedes, as the virus disappears, as hospitalizations go to zero, as deaths go to zero, it's time for the government to ramp up COVID measures and new laws and lockdowns and so forth. Something about this, Mike, just doesn't make any logical sense.
Well, of course, this is all about stopping a second lockdown, apparently. And so we're going to stop a second lockdown by imposing a second lockdown. Anyway, let's move on to this then, because the government's facing some kind of backlash in Parliament about this.
Well, there is some pushback, and this was just out recently. This is the Telegraph here. There is a mounting backlash, and it's coming from, I would say, the real what's left of the conservative movement within the Conservative Party. Because as anybody would tell you, Mike, you look at the policies and actions of this Boris Johnson Tory government. There's absolutely nothing conservative about it. It's kind of looks like a quasi Marxist, fascist socializing and nationalizing the economy and paying people to go out to eat and things like this. I mean, you don't get any more socialist than that. So there is pushback here, and it's coming from, led by Sir Charles Walker, and he is the vice chair of the very influential 1922 Parliamentary Committee. And this is what he has to say. He says, I'm incredibly exercised about the continued use of government of powers that we granted it 6 months ago, admittedly to basically restrict people's civil liberties without any recourse back to Parliament. And he goes on to say, now these powers are due to be reviewed at the end of September, beginning of October, and hopefully there'll be another vote on them. And I will be voting, if given the chance to vote, and this rather strange Parliament to curtail the government's powers. So that's a Sir Charles Walker. That is potentially significant. I mean, there is talk, there is rumblings, Mike, on social media amongst the conservative base about a vote of no confidence against this government. I mean, what do you see right now in terms of the political risk that Boris Johnson and his gang are really pushing really fast and really hard on this? What's the potential blowback?
I think we're starting to see various people, perhaps some of the usual suspects, being a bit skeptical about this, pushing back, as this report in the Telegraph is saying. But whether there are enough of them to deal with his majority or not remains to be seen. There is no question, and we're later in the program, towards the end of the program, we'll be talking a little bit more about this new legislation, this internal market legislation, which is causing such a furore over the Brexit negotiations. But if you remember back to the end of last year, after Boris had just become Prime Minister, the complaint from Parliament was that Parliament isn't having a say in what Boris was doing over Brexit. Parliament's still not having a say over what Boris is doing over this. And there doesn't seem to be very much pushback from the opposition. There seems to be more pushback from elements within the Conservative Party itself. So we'll see how that develops.
Labour is just completely absent without leave in terms of opposition. The only thing they're opposing, the Tories, is, you know, how much do you lock down, or how much social distancing,
absolutely,
or how much testing, or, you know, how much PPE. So there's zero opposition from the left, from the Labour. They're totally on board pretty much with this agenda.
So while Boris, as we'll mention later, while Boris is busy saying to the EU that Parliament is sovereign, he's busy sidelining Parliament at every opportunity with domestic politics. It's a very interesting situation. Now, let's move on to this Operation Moonshot. £1 billion of daily COVID testing. That's the direction that we're heading in.
100 billion, that's...
sorry, £100 billion, yes.
How much is that in terms of the NHS budget?
That's 2/3 of the annual NHS budget. So £100 billion has just been magically raised out of nothing, and they're going to use that for Operation Moonbeam, or whatever that's supposed to be. Now, why has this happened? Because apparently, Patrick, there have been 2,919 more new coronavirus cases and 14 deaths. That led to the rule of 6. It's led to this partial lockdown, and it's also led to Operation Moonshot. This was mentioned in Parliament yesterday by the lovely Matt Hancock. Let's just have a brief listen to what he said here.
We're developing new types of tests which are simple, quick and scalable. They use swabs or saliva. They can be turned around in 90 minutes or even 20 minutes. The so-called Operation Moonshot, to deploy mass testing, will allow people to lead more normal lives and reduce the need for social distancing. For instance, it could mean theatres and sports venues could test audience members on the day and let in those with a negative result. Workplaces could be opened up to all those who test negative that morning. And anyone isolating because they are a contact or quarantining after travelling abroad could be tested and released.
So we're talking about a test every day you go into work, Patrick. What does this lead to? Well, I believe this leads to immunity passports eventually, and the traffic light system, green, amber and red, of course. We've been talking about this for months now. They're not talking about this, the possibility of immunity passports openly. We mentioned on the programme last week the fact that Ireland is talking about it openly, but the UK not yet. But this is obviously a prerequisite for that.
Did you hear what he said at the end? He said if you're traveling or instead of quarantine, you'd be tested and then released.
Yes.
If you're negative. So did that imply?
What happens if you're positive?
Yeah. Are you being detained? You're going to be in a COVID facility or something like this. Is just incredible. This is not happening in other countries, by the way. China is not even doing this extreme amount of biosurveillance and social control.
And that's what it is. It is biosurveillance.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's taking the surveillance state to whole new levels. Now, the fact is that if you read the mainstream press, at least, many people saying that this it hasn't had the support of the cabinet in general, that Matt Hancock has got his way over this. They're putting this whole thing at the door of Matt Hancock itself. However, when you actually look at the type of things that are being said, they're talking about a Manhattan Project type approach to delivering the level of innovation pace required to make this possible. So this definitely sounds like it's being driven along by Dominic Cummings. Because that's the type of language that he has been using.
But this is also the type of language that the World Health Organization is using, and Bill Gates, equating this to a World War II scenario, or we need to mobilize like we did in World War II. So invoking the Manhattan Project in terms of the bomb, not a great positive connotation there in general, but hey, the government chooses their words. But using the war narrative, the war metaphor, very important. So this is what we're going through here is this is the living memory of this generation of the country. This is what it's meant to replace, that sort of living memory that we had with the world wars, and then you can construct a new social or a new world order around that sort of psychological construct.
Yes, indeed. Now, Matt Hancock had a little bit more to say.
Now, finally, Mr. Speaker, the most important thing that each and every one of us can do is to remember the small things that can make a big difference. Hands, face, space. And if you have symptoms, get a test.
So this is the new mantra: hands, face, space. You got to wash your hands, you got to wear a mask, you got to keep your social distance. Hands, face, space. We all have to know that off by heart. And the marshals, if they stop us in the street and we don't know it off by heart, we're going to get lines to do. Some other kind of, maybe we get a detention or something, I'm not sure. But it's pathetic, isn't it? It is so childish, the way that the British people being treated at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, space, the last word is the operative word, space. Clearly, the government, Matt Hancock, are right out in orbit right now, clear out in space. And they're going to overshoot the moon, by the way, on this one, and head out into the abyss of the Milky Way, because this is absolutely one of the most insane things. I mean, there's a lot of people wagering right now, Mike, is this going to be the mother of all cock-ups? You know, is this going to go down history as the ultimate? This is the Captain Ahab moment for this government that's just desperately trying to save face. They're desperately trying to save face because COVID is almost non-existent as a threat to public health, and they're ramping it up in a way to justify retroactively everything that they've done from lockdown till now. So they're doubling down really on policies that have been a complete failure from the beginning. From A to Z, it's been a complete failure, and here they are. They're doubling down. They're raising the ante again. Is this going to be one of those tragic moments in history for this government?
Well, we could hope so. Now, the question is, what kind of tests are we looking at here, Patrick?
This is quite disturbing. Some of the statements being made by this character here, Boris Johnson, that's Al to you and me. Through the moonshot, Boris says, of daily testing, everybody gets, get this, a pregnancy-style test, a rapid turnaround test in the morning. 15 minutes later, you know whether you are infectious or not. So this is Boris's new rapid pregnancy-style initiative. So
does that mean that if you're entering your place of work, you have to queue up outside the loos in order to take this test?
Or outside the door? I don't know. I don't think this is going to be very feasible for small businesses, but I can see Amazon and some of the big Google, some of the big employers, they'll definitely come up with systems. Large employers, supermarkets, and so forth.
Okay.
But he goes on here. This is the interesting part. You may, you may not know whether you are infected or not, but you know whether you are infectious or not. That's a hard thing I had getting my head around, Mike. We'll come back to that. And he continues and says, and that gives you a kind of passport, freedom to mingle with everybody else who is similarly not infectious in a way that is currently impossible. So take a look at this and try to translate what exactly Boris is attempting to do here with the language.
I'm hoping you can tell me, because I sure as heck can't work it out. Infected, infectious. If you're not infected, how can you be infectious? If you are infected, how could you not be infectious?
Yeah, so he's saying that you can't know if you're infected, but you will know whether you're infectious. It's very confusing, to say the least. And what I see, and by the way, Mike, he's saying we're aiming for all of that. We're driving for that. And as I've said, we cannot be 100% sure that we can deliver that in its entirety. So it's completely confusing every way you cut it. I mean, it's almost like they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. And this is a typical abuse of the language as well that's going on. And we'll talk about this later in maybe a future segment, another program. But this idea that a positive test for coronavirus equals a case is a complete abomination of medical terminology. It's not. It's totally misrepresenting the reality of science and medicine. A positive test is not a case. And some people might argue as well that a positive test, a PCR test, for instance, is not an infection either. There's some people say that we spoke about this on the last program, that the PCR test is picking up remnants of old coronavirus genetic material.
If it's even limited to coronavirus, in fact.
Yeah, because some of
this particular coronavirus.
That's right, because some of the gene sequences are similar between different viruses and genetic material. So to say that you have, like, say today, we've tested 200,000 people and we've had 4,000 new cases. That is a total lie and a complete misrepresentation of reality. But yet, Mike, they are building their policies on top of that lie. On top of that deception, this government, the US government, European governments, other countries are building all of these new COVID policies, these biosurveillance rules and laws are being built on top of the lie that a positive test or PCR test equals a case. It does not. It doesn't say whether you're going to be you have an infection, whether there's an active virus, whether you're going to be sick. None of that. In fact, of all the positive, quote, coronavirus tests, I think a very small percentage, something like maybe 0.3%, 0.3%, might end up with some complications. And out of those, a very small percentage would end up with any serious hospitalization. So to represent all of these positive tests, so-called, as cases, is a complete lie.
So one of the other things that Matt Hancock said was, of course, in order for this to work, what's needed is behaviour change. And that ultimately is what this is all about, of course, because it's not about medicine or safety at all. So perhaps not surprising, we'll bring this on again. This is one of the tests, one of the companies that they're intending to use, and their test is based on what are described as nudge box machines. So absolutely, this is about behaviour change, and it's in the language everywhere we look. So these machines supplied by DNA Nudge, 5,000 of them are being rolled out across NHS hospitals in the UK. These are going to analyse DNA in nose swabs, providing a negative or positive test result in 90 minutes. So that's not quite 15 minutes, but nonetheless, it's faster than the 24 to 48 hours that it's taking from other people. And then we have this lot as well from Nanopore, and this is the Lampore test, which I believe will do the job in 30 minutes. So that's another one that's on the cards at the moment, but they need to go a bit further if they want to get to 15 minutes. But whether they will or not is it's probably pretty unlikely. So where does that take us? We've got new jobs on the horizon.
Yeah, so career opportunities with mass unemployment and piling up people onto the unemployment dole queue. We have opportunities with coronavirus. One of them, of course, the marshals, which we mentioned earlier. That's a good career move, but
it may not be paid.
It might not be paid, so it's more of a work experience type thing to get your foot on the new COVID economy ladder, the marshals. But here's one that actually pays, Mike. This is the COVID community researcher. There's ads going out all over the country in every single borough, every single district right now this week.
So this one's from Pertemps, which is a recruitment agency?
Yeah, and there's other recruitment agencies who are also pushing these jobs as well. So looking for your chance to make a difference and be part of an exciting national COVID-19 research project, join our task force. Let's take a closer look here at what they're offering. This is an opportunity that you will have real impact in the heart of your community while flexibly working for one of the UK's best-known brands. Is that Serco?
But it's not stated.
It's not stated,
right.
But we put in brackets there. Is it Serco? So you will be responsible for delivering and collecting COVID-19 swab tests and a questionnaire to the doorsteps of participating households. So this is a big, big initiative, Mike. This is nationwide. We found these ads basically all over the country in different regions. So clearly this is part of a bigger push here. And let's look at what else they're saying here. This is all done in a safe, socially distanced manner, and you will not need to have any direct contact with any of the participants. Full PPE will also be provided. So let's take a look at the job specs here. The contract will be running until the end of March 2021, but may be extended. That's interesting. That gives us an idea of the timeline. Interested, they say? Well, what are the perks? Pay rate 130 quid a day, plus travel expenses. Part-time flexible shifts also available, and immediate start on completion of the training. And guess what? You can do the training online, Mike. So that makes it even more convenient and high-tech and very much with it, into the future, this brave new world we go. COVID researcher. So you're not a test Nazi, you're a community researcher. Love the language.
Excellent, excellent. Well, look, one of the questions that many have been asking for quite some time is, when did COVID actually arrive? More suggestions, because we've covered this quite a bit in this program. The fact that there's been evidence that COVID has, or at least coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, has been doing the rounds of various European countries for quite a number of months before it was officially recognized. Well, here's another one. This is from UCLA. From their newsroom yesterday, COVID-19 may have been in LA as early as last December, UCLA-led study suggests. Now, what's interesting here, Patrick, is that if we go and start looking at the mainstream media coverage of this, we start finding that this is being used to justify attacks on China, because the allegation is, well, if SARS-CoV-2 was doing the rounds in December and China didn't notify the world about it until later on in December, then China was trying to cover something up, and that China is really responsible for everything that's happened since.
Yeah, the implication is they knew, but they didn't tell us. Therefore, they're complicit. They started the pandemic.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, what I have to say here is that since this situation arose, there has been work done by many people to establish the sort of ground zero of where this all began, who's patient number one, and so on. Now, either we believe that we know where it began, and the allegation is it began in Wuhan, or China covered up, and it was actually circulating a lot longer before that patient number one that was identified in Wuhan. We can't have it both ways. So what is our narrative? Is our narrative that it began in China and China covered up, or that it was circulating earlier, or what is our narrative? We can't blame China for it if in fact it was already doing the rounds of Europe and the United States months before it was in China.
And this kind of, we can talk about this in a future program, Mike, but this kind of goes along with some of the genetic studies, particularly by Cambridge University, to identify the different strains, the A, the B, and the C of this coronavirus. And apparently the outbreak in Wuhan was a B strain. So this does imply there is a possibility that the coronavirus was brought and planted into Wuhan first from the United States, which has the A strain. Europe has the B and the C strain.
Yes.
That's the prevalent strain. So there's a mix of all of the above in all of the different locations, but they're looking for sort of the prevalence and the timelines. So what you just showed me there does kind of lean towards possible suspected cause or suspected ground zero outside of China.
But in the meantime, this is being used as an excuse for another attack on China. And
Yeah,
that seems
they've spun it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and the British, by the way, also the story came out in the British paper. The oldest case on record would be a British man in his 80s, I believe.
Well, actually, we have that here.
Oh, you've got
there you
that.
go. So there it is. This shows there's been a major cover-up in China from the word go. Ian Duncan Smith calls for inquiry. As it's revealed, the British grandfather, 84, who died from COVID-19, caught it in December, 3 days before Beijing reported the outbreak to the World Health Organization. So that's the Mail pushing the same narrative as is being built in the United States as well.
Yeah.
Not sure what more we can say about that, but it seems that COVID is the thing, the gift that keeps on giving, because you can bring all kinds of failed policy agendas in, and all kinds of rhetoric about foreign nations in. It just keeps on giving.
Yeah, and that's going to be important coming up to the U.S. election as well. It's going to be a big issue.
Absolutely. Now, here's a peer-reviewed peer-reviewed paper, from Science Direct: Effect of calcifoidal treatment on and best available therapy versus available therapy on intensive care unit admission and mortality among patients hospitalized for COVID-19, a pilot randomized clinical study. So what's this about? Well, it's about vitamin D, and it's a special form of vitamin D that was used in this randomized study. They discovered that basically people that were being given this form of vitamin D had a significantly less risk of ending up in intensive care as people that weren't given it. And of course, the point here, Patrick, is that this is an issue that we've been covering for quite a long time on this. So here's the print: vitamin D supplement could reduce health risks in COVID patients, Spanish study says. Now, what's interesting about this, that this is about the paper we've just shown. It then goes on to say that experts are not so convinced. So are the people that ran the study, are they not experts? Is it just that they're the wrong kind of experts? This is a typical sort of mainstream media headline here that, well, here's some good news, but experts aren't convinced. Anytime that, this same happened with hydroxychloroquine, anytime there's any kind of solution to this problem which doesn't involve lockdowns or vaccines, then experts are suddenly not convinced. Not really sure what else to say about that, other than I'd like to know exactly who these experts are. But anyway, we've been talking about this for some time. Another reason vitamin D is important: it gets T cells going. This is Scientific American. We've got more here: new insights into the role of vitamin D in our immune system. There's just paper after paper on this. Vitamin D crucial to activating immune defenses. Vitamin D deficiency, the silent epidemic of the elderly. And of course, as we know, COVID mainly attacks the elderly. This is one of the key explanations for that, and the same for the Black and ethnic minorities that have been suffering disproportionately as a result of this as well, because they have significantly higher vitamin D deficiency than other ethnic groups in the UK. So there's just information after information about vitamin D and COVID-19, but it's generally ignored because vitamin D is cheaper than vaccines.
Well, you can just buy it at the health food store or at Boots, Mike. But what this tells us is that there's a lot going on in the immune system, Mike, that doesn't have to do specifically with antibodies. We're talking about adaptive immunity, like T-cell response, for instance. And then this discovery that vitamin D is actually really instrumental in the performance of your adaptive immune system, i.e. T-cells, and how important they are, and how this is also a risk factor for elderly. Their T-cell performance does tend to drop with age, that sort of immune response. So that being the main defense mechanism against this type of a coronavirus or an influenza, it really does draw you away from this idea that a vaccine will somehow save everybody. So, and again, I think this is why the press doesn't like it. This is why the establishment doesn't like it, because it brings the conversation into natural adaptive immunity. And the media, the government, they don't, Bill Gates, the pharmaceutical companies, they don't want us to be talking about that in that conversation.
No, absolutely
They
not.
want us to be talking about antibodies and vaccines. That's it. So to them, this is the only way you can sort of save the world from the dreaded COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, let's come on to economic news. Well, good news, Patrick. The UK economy continues recovery in July, according to the BBC. This is spectacular stuff. Let's see what they have to say here. The UK economy grew by 6.6% in July, according to official figures. Now, this sounds very exciting until you realise that actually it's still 12% below where it was before we started all this. And of course, when you've collapsed something to almost nothing, and
to
then
below nothing.
And then it improves slightly.
So basically, this is the dead cat lifting his paw up just a few millimeters and then going, oh.
Yeah.
That's the 6.6%.
I can't be bothered. Look, I'm going to put a fake news label on this because it's an appalling article. Now, it does.
Are you saying the BBC is doing fake news?
No, I wouldn't possibly say anything like that.
Right, just checking.
Now, they quote this gentleman, Thomas Pugh from Capital Economics, who says the reopening of restaurants and pubs means hospitality sector rose by a whopping 140.8% between June and July.
Right. From minus 50%.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. So I'm presuming that Thomas Pugh may well have said quite a bit more than this, and the BBC just didn't bother quoting the rest. I'd be very disappointed if he thought this was good news.
Well, the Rishi Sunak is probably happy about that because that's all down to Eat Out to Help Out, isn't it?
No, it isn't, because the effective Eat Out to Help, that was August. So this is before the Eat Out to Help Out.
Right.
So I'm sure he's looking forward to even better percentage numbers that can be quoted next month.
They'll have something to celebrate next month.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, just to put this a bit more serious for a second, of course, the economy is still 12% below where it was. It is pretty hard to overstate how significant that is, how serious that is. The UK is still heading towards 7-8 million unemployed by the end of the year.
Or more.
Or potentially more. And it all depends on what happens over the furlough scheme. But many companies are not going to be taking people off the furlough scheme. They're going to be making them redundant.
What do you think these new measures are going to do for Christmas? Normally you get a Christmas bounce, right, on the economy. These new measures by the government, are they going to help performance of the economy or hurt performance going into Christmas?
Well, we don't actually know yet what the government is going to do once the furlough scheme ends.
But social distancing, rule of 6, this can't be good for economic activity.
No, it is forcing people to do more online shopping rather than actually going out into the community and into the high streets. So the high streets are suffering. We're seeing closures every day.
And there's a dark economy. It was this was written about over the weekend, Mike. The office economy. That's all the businesses that serve offices in those environments, in those city centers and so forth. They're calling this a trillion pound dark economy. Basically, it doesn't necessarily get calculated in the way that other things are calculated. But you take away all the people going to work, going to the office, and then you have a massive economic hole that's created as a result of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll keep you posted as this develops. In the meantime, if you like what the UK Column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there. And I just wanted to let everybody know that had ordered a Not Convinced t-shirt, that those finally came in yesterday, and we got them posted out yesterday for everybody that was waiting. So thanks for your patience on that, but they're on their way to you, and hopefully you'll have them in a day or two.
Very nice t-shirts. Very nice. A great idea for a pre-Christmas gift.
Oh, well, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. Now let's move on to Julian Assange then.
Well, this is the hearing. The trial has begun on Monday. This is Julian Assange's extradition hearing. He's fighting extradition to the U.S. This is taking place at the Old Bailey in London, and we do have some footage courtesy of Let Me Look TV. Let's take a look at a little montage of what's happened so far this week.
Freedom of the press now rests with the honourable few, the exceptions, the dissidents on the internet who belong to no club, who are neither rich nor laden with Pulitzer Prizes, but produce fine, disobedient, moral journalism, those like Julian Assange. Meanwhile, it's our responsibility to stand by a true journalist whose sheer courage ought to be inspiration to all of us who believe that freedom is still a possibility. I salute him.
Hello, and thank you all for coming here today in this very important day for the future of journalism. I was asked a little earlier, are you hopeful? Am I hopeful for justice? I am hesitant to be hopeful, but hope is not enough. We need to fight for the justice. We need to show our determination to have this extradition request dismissed, because the future of journalism is at stake. There is so much at stake here. A journalist asked me here, the Americans say that WikiLeaks has caused harm by publishing information, and it angered me, and it still angers me. Do we want to talk about harm? I can talk to you about harm. I can talk to you about the young guys who went out at night to collect firewood and were killed, assassinated with a Hellfire missile. I can tell you about the family that was driving a little bit too fast towards the checkpoint in Baghdad and were killed by an 18-year-old soldier. I can tell you about the two children who are now fatherless and whom I met in Baghdad because their father, Matasser Tomal, just stopped his van and tried to save the life of a Reuters journalist, Said Smar. That is the harm I want to talk about. That is the harm that we should be focusing on. And you would not know about this harm if it wasn't for WikiLeaks, if it wasn't for Julian Assange. And we have to fight for that right. It is the most important fight. It's the most important fight of this century when it comes to journalism. Let's keep up the fight. Let's stay strong. Let's not rely on hope. Let's fight for justice.
So that was award-winning documentary filmmaker and journalist John Pilger initially, and then WikiLeaks editor just there, Christian Harfson, and that was outside the Old Bailey with the demonstration. But let's take a look at what's happened with this so far. Just a quick summary. This is WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is fighting attempts by the UK establishment and the United States Department of Justice to send him to the US for a trial for, quote, conspiring to hack government computers and supposedly in violation of the 1917 Espionage Act when confidential cables were published by WikiLeaks. That was 2010 to 2011, Mike. So the important takeaway here is that we covered this earlier when we had the Woolwich Crown Court Belmarsh prison trial. We talked about that, but basically the U.S. have recycled the case they made against Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning. They recycled and have reconfigured that case and tried to apply it to Julian Assange here, and total 175 years in prison. This would be back-to-back life sentences. There's no evidence at all that any of the charges by the United States, according to many leading journalists around the world, that there's any basis for it at all. So they literally have just made up in order to fill up a whole new set of indictments. And sadly, the judiciary in Britain is going along with the gag, basically. And we did hear as well, Mike, we'll talk about COVID has somehow made its way into this. This is Judge Vanessa Baretzer adjourned the case yesterday until Monday after being informed that one of the lawyers had been, quote, exposed to the virus. So this is just happening as the defense has been running rings around the prosecution on this. So, but COVID has come into the court. Let's look at what the head of Julian Assange's defense team here, Edward Fitzgerald QC, what he says here. He says, this is what he said to the court. At the moment, we'd respectfully submit we have to go ahead on the assumption that she, the lawyer, has COVID. And he goes on to say, if that is a correct assumption, we shouldn't really be here. COVID would be here in the courtroom, and it's not possible to tell how far it's extended. So again, a little twist in the drama here. One of the most important precedent cases in terms of freedom of the press, and COVID has somehow come in, Coroni's come in to disrupt the whole situation. This is with worldwide ranging implications. Yeah. So let's look a little bit about the timing of this is interesting. This is coming right now at the moment where we have the resumption of criminal trials and in-person hearings in England and Wales. And just this week, Birmingham Crown Court evacuated, closed temporarily for a, quote, deep clean after one staff had developed coronavirus symptoms, Mike, not even tested positive, but developed symptoms. And this follows on in August. Manchester Crown Court shut after 8 staff tested positive for coronavirus. So this is we're seeing a trend here.
Yeah, because of course, while we were in lockdown, they were holding some cases via video link, and this, of course, is going to build pressure to start doing the same thing again. But this is something which has been on the cards for many years. This is Brian Levison, Lord Levison, who ran the inquiry into the freedom of the press, of course. But after he ran that inquiry, his next job was to look at the digitisation of the British court system. Modernisation of justice through technology and innovation is how that was branded by the Ministry of Justice. And he said that he wanted to see more remote hearings, lighter case management by judges, including the provision of timetables for evidence and speeches, all that provided electronically, and so on. So it is amazing how COVID keeps apparently working in cooperation with governments to drive forward policy agendas that they've maybe not been able to get much traction on in recent years.
Policy agendas that were already on the policy track before COVID-19 hit.
Absolutely.
And COVID has accelerated all of these policies.
Absolutely.
This is just one example.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, now, large furore going on in Parliament at the moment over this new internal market bill. This is causing friction between the UK and the EU as well. And it's because the government is determined to press ahead with it, even though it overrides key parts of the Brexit agreement over the divorce. This is for the legislation that went into place, or the treaty that went into place to get us out of the EU, in inverted commas, and not so much to do with the future relationship, which is when we go back in again. But of course it is very likely to affect those negotiations for the future relationship. So this bill was originally proposed in July. It sets out government plans to make sure that trade between the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, because we need to have an internal market between those 4 nations with devolution and so on. And it's mainly, this issue has arisen mainly because of devolution, because the devolved administrations were able to set certain policies, but only within constraints set by the European Union. Now that we're out of the European Union, in inverted commas at least, then there's a potential that that administrations could do different things. The Scottish government could do something different to the English government, and this is an attempt by the UK government to actually put some constraints back on the devolved administrations. But there's a conflict between this and what the agreement that they already have in place with the European Union. So there's a recognition and an admission by the British government that this new legislation which is going through Parliament is actually in breach of international law. They acknowledge that. They're being heavily criticised by many of the same people, by the way, that you were talking about earlier in the programme, Patrick, that are criticising them over the continued pseudo-lockdown that we're in at the moment. And so it remains to be seen how this goes. But as I said earlier, Patrick, the key thing here is the government insists that in respect of this, Parliament is sovereign. And yet the government won't go near Parliament, doesn't want to know Parliament, doesn't want to know Parliament's opinions when those opinions don't suit the government. So this government seems to be utterly out of control. And yet there doesn't seem to be, other than, as we've said, this relatively older Conservative group within the Conservative Party seems to be the only opposition to them, because the official opposition isn't providing any opposition at all.
This is a total breakdown of democracy, basically, in the UK. And this does follow that sort of long trend, Mike, with the dismantling of the House of Lords, because isn't that where you might also get opposition to what's going on right now? This was begun under the Blair government, and now we have a situation where, democracy, Parliament is not really in the picture, is it?
Well, absolutely. That's absolutely right. Now, on the international level, then, the Irish had something to say about this a couple of days ago. The UK must honour the divorce agreement to get a free trade deal. So the Irish absolutely saying that the future relationship is dependent on them honouring the previous treaty. But what Varadkar then went on to say was that the Irish government is going to be giving Irish companies a grant of €9,000 per employee hired or redeployed to handle the customs changes which are going to come about as a result of whatever deal is done over Brexit, if there is a deal done. So it's interesting to watch how this develops, but I just want to once again make this note of caution that, of course, as we approach the deadline towards the end of the so-called transition period on the 31st of December, we are going to see many more headlines and much more angst from people that are involved in this negotiation and from other political commentators, and particularly from people that never wanted us to leave the EU in the first place, suggesting that the sky is falling and that the world is ending because of the way that these negotiations are going. Whether Boris and David Frost and his team are absolutely determined to take us out with a no deal, as they are implying, or whether that is merely a negotiating tactic, I think we've got plenty of evidence that it's more likely to be the latter of those. It's just a negotiating tactic, and we probably are just going to have to ignore much of the noise that there's going to be around this for the next 3 months. And
the border issue in Ireland hasn't actually gone away, has it?
It absolutely hasn't gone away, and I think there is a general acknowledgement now that that border will be down the Irish Sea. So
we'll cover that more.
We will
do.
Now let's come back on to Alexei Navalny. Apparently, he was poisoned with Novichok, as we mentioned on the last couple of programs, but slow, Patrick.
Oh, this is the new Novichok.
This is the new Novichok. It's a new kind of Novichok. It's deadlier, apparently, even though it didn't kill him. It's deadlier, but it's slow-acting form of the compound.
That's right, Mike. You've absolutely nailed it. It's deadlier, but not deadly. That's the important thing you need to understand about this Novichok. It doesn't actually kill anybody. But it's deadlier. But it acts slower. This is the new time release feature that Putin supposedly is rolling out with a new
in a time release capsule of some kind, a bit like some kind of painkiller or something.
Sort of like that, but in a kind of we think it might be a gel or maybe a spray-on gel, but with a time release of, I don't know, something between an hour and 48 hours or something like that.
Well, apparently this new form of Novichok, of course, originally formulated by the Soviet Union, apparently in the 1970s, but apparently this version is previously unknown to Western intelligence agencies, so they haven't come across it before, and so therefore it can only have been the Russians that did it.
Sure, especially since especially since the only country who reconstituted Novichok in the laboratory setting was the United States. In fact, at Fort Detrick.
Absolutely.
And the country who decommissioned the chemical weapons labs in Uzbekistan was the United States.
Yes, indeed.
So, but don't look over there.
No, don't.
They have nothing to do with it.
Nothing at all. But the Germans seem a bit confused, a bit like Coroni. They do get confused. So here's Geza Andreas von Gehr, who's a German ambassador to Russia, and he said this: "We have no intention of delivering any evidence to Russia. There's no reason to do so." It's kind of a paraphrase of what he said. So the Russians want the evidence to show that it was Russian Novichok which caused this poisoning, but the Germans have said that they're not going to do that. There's no reason to do so. But that's a bit confusing because just a few days ago, Heiko Maas, the German foreign minister, said, "We approved the Russians' request for assistance long ago, and as a matter of fact, there's no reason to turn it down." So this is a bit confusing. So what has caused the German government to change their mind, as they clearly have? Well, perhaps we get a clue from what we talked about on Wednesday, which was the G7 statement on the Navalny, where they jointly, the G7 nations, issued a statement saying basically the G7 foreign ministers of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and United States, and the High Representative of the European Union are united in condemning in the strongest possible terms the confirmed poisoning of Alexei Navalny, and we made the point that this was the result of the rapid response mechanism launched by Theresa May back in 2018, June or July, at the G7 meeting there. So the German government then, Patrick, clearly had every intention of giving the evidence that they have that this was real Novichok to the Russians. And then they all got round a table with the other G7 leaders, and between them they decided that this probably wasn't a good idea because actually maybe there's no evidence there. But anyway, that's
or
sheer speculation.
There might be BZ or something like that in the test.
Right.
That was probably put there just as a tracer, just to
Possibly.
ensure the lab.
So the G7 have decided that they've got to issue a joint statement, and maybe Germany should change their tune, which they seem to have done. Which brings us on to Arne Kalatz, the German Ministry of Defense, because he said the data has been given to the OPCW. So the Russians should feel assured that the OPCW will do a good job, shouldn't they?
Yeah, the OPCW, a completely credible organization, right? Totally hasn't done any cover-ups of anything, hasn't made up any chemical weapons attacks in Syria. I'd go with them, sure. If I was the West, I would go with the OPCW.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's what the Russian spokesman Dmitry Peskov had to say. We don't know what they've given to the OPCW. Would naturally prefer that they hand over those analyses directly to us. But it gets worse, Patrick, because as RT is reporting, and thank you for this one, Navalny aids rubbish sensationalist Der Spiegel Bellingcat article that claims new security fears for recovered activist. What are they saying here?
Well, as usual, Bellingcat is drafted in, and unfortunately, Der Spiegel, as an international publication, the reputation is just completely in tatters because they've allowed the Western intelligence agencies to kind of allow Bellingcat to have kind of a in-house position there in terms of pumping out whatever the sort of NATO state propaganda line is, especially on anything Russia-related. So now Bellingcat has this kind of in-house position there. They burrowed into Der Spiegel and completely destroyed any of their journalistic reputation as a result. But they're getting a lot of awards for this, Mike, in fact. So this is the amazing thing, is this, there's always awards that go along with this sort of reporting, even though it's not factually based. And most of it is just contrived propaganda.
Yes. Well, we'll end with this one then, Patrick, because it is the 11th of September.
Well, it is the anniversary of September 11th. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the 19th
yes, indeed.
anniversary of 9/11. I can't imagine what next year is going to be like, the 20th anniversary. But the judge orders here testimony from Saudi officials in a suit. This is a lawsuit over their involvement in the 9/11 attacks. So this just was announced yesterday, so the timing of that is somewhat auspicious, Mike. But I don't think it's going to be that easy for any U.S. court to get any Saudi officials to come and provide any evidence or testify. They're most likely going to get blanked on this. But what we're seeing, Mike, is this is being used as leverage. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. And part of it, I think, my personal opinion, is to keep Saudi in line with the West, with the United States and its allies, and making sure they're not going off reservation on whatever the global agenda is. So 9/11 is a very convenient device in order to keep the Saudis cornered where the West want them, basically. And they have the Khashoggi investigation is a complete sham, and the whole narrative behind that is just a complete wreck. So that's also being used in a way as well to keep them cornered. So this is a big deal in terms of oil price production, OPEC, and then the geopolitics in the Persian Gulf vis-a-vis Iran, for instance, and aggressive policies towards Iran. We're already seeing the UAE is already opened up normal relations with Israel, the flights going back and forth, all sorts of exchanges. So that's a big.
Well, actually, Donald Trump was claiming credit for that.
Yes, and so this is an election set piece that Trump wanted to get into place with his son-in-law Jared Kushner in the run-up to the election. But the Arabs are seeing this as a stab in the back to Palestine. And really, if you look at it historically, it kind of is. And in terms of international law, it is. Now, Saudi is pretty much aligned generally with the UAE on most things. So Saudi is also moving closer towards Israel as well. This invariably is going to cause even more tension and more of a split between certain Arab states and others, with Palestine being the central issue there.
Yeah.
So we'll take a look. But yeah, 9/11 next year. You have a whole year to gear up for the biggest festival of terrorist remembrance ever, probably in your lifetime, will be the 20th anniversary of 9/11, so we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for joining us today. We've got to leave it there. We hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. We'll see you then. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.